Hi, Osama, and thank you so much for finding the time to talk to me. We're so far apart. I really appreciate it, and I wanted to have a number of conversations with people who have been either working in or researching the topics associated with cyber risk and anything associated with that topic. Um, I am personally am experiencing a deja vu where I feel what we're now seeing with cyber risk is exactly the same as what we had with Y2K, SOX, or literally any other initiative that is primarily driven by consultants and software vendors. And that really kind of distracts us from reality. So I wanted to have this conversation with you today to try and help me separate the myth from the reality when it comes to cyber-related risks and cybersecurity. I know you've been researching this topic quite a lot, and I know you've been applying some of this research in your work. What have you discovered? What stands out for you?
Okay, Alex, thanks for having me. Just first thing I wanted to make clear, whatever I'm saying is my personal opinion, has nothing to do with my employer. Um,
Naturally.
regarding your, yeah, regarding what you mentioned, I've been doing information security for the last 10 years or so. And like you mentioned, the IT industry is very strongly impacted by vendors and consultants. So mostly we're driven by what the new solutions are, and they shape our thinking. So that's not a good situation to be in. And then also we have this cult of best practices. Every year there's a new best practice, and we don't question them. We just adopt them and we go with them. There's very little critical thinking. And part of it is in the risk management domain. As you're aware, we are doing 90% of everyone in cybersecurity is doing heat maps. No one is questioning it. And there's a big industry of certifications and books and whatever is still pushing this message. So that was one area where I was very interested in, because I believe for information security, risk management is foundational. And I believe if you figure this one out, then you'll be able to make the right decisions and move forward.
And just for the benefit of our kind of listeners, if we ever make this conversation public, just for their benefit, I think right now, in closer to the end of 2018, there is now compelling evidence to suggest that any kind of qualitative, subjective-based risk analysis, risk assessment, including heat maps, are so fundamentally flawed by design that they're highly unlikely to produce truthful, insightful results. So all they do is they create a lot of work, but they also deceive the decision makers into thinking something is important when it isn't, and hiding or not helping to identify the real exposures. So there's compelling evidence, and I've been pushing this for so long. If you've been living under the rock and you haven't read this research, just Google the risk of using risk matrices. I personally believe the research is pretty compelling on why you would never use a heat map for any kind of serious actual business decision. But anyway, sorry, I
Yeah, I
interrupted
agree
you.
with you. No, it's okay. I agree with you. Once you're exposed to that information, it becomes clear. Oh my God, why was I doing that? But this is completely hidden from people that practice risk management. Because, there are certifications and best practices. No one of them talks about using probability theory or distributions and stuff like that. First thing you see is a heat map in front of you, and everyone is doing it. So you never get into the mode of, should I be questioning this? And everyone tells it to you as a best practice. So you tell yourself, who am I to question this if everyone else is doing it? But once you start reading and then you see the first signs, you become skeptical,
yeah.
and then it just avalanches and then it becomes bigger and bigger. For me, it started with reading the book by Douglas Hubbard about measurement in business. It doesn't even have anything to do with risk management. But it changed my perception that there's no such thing as intangible, really. It's just we're not asking the right questions, we don't know the methods on how to measure it, and so on. So that was kind of a revelation for me. Oh my God, and it's something which is for others maybe very clear to others. But for me and in my industry, this was like something completely different.
I've just diverted my eyes to my phone so I can actually search for it. The book was published, and I mean, obviously, I know it's called How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard. It's been, the reason why I searched for it, I wanted to know when it was first published. It was first published in 2007. So it's 11 years old. I mean, this information has been around for so long, there's literally no excuse. And he also, in 2009, he published another book called Why Risk Management is Broken and How to Fix It, which again gives you a lot of compelling research-based evidence to suggest that most of the risk management practices currently used are absolute bullshit. And this is just, this is mind-blowing. 2007, 2008, 2009, and here we are. I mean, you know, you ask the question, who am I to challenge? Well, I obviously don't have that internal mechanism. I challenge anything and anybody, and still in 2018, every single week we're having conversations how heat maps still can be useful for something, and how it all depends on the right application, and apparently you can turn heat map into a very useful decision-making tool. All lies, of course, but it's just, it's fascinating.
No, I agree with what you said. But really, we are slaves to best practices in our industry. It's the cult of best practices, I call it, and it's very difficult to get out of it. It's a whole ecosystem of certifications and consultants and pushing the same message over and over again. But that's why critical thinking is so important. I think recently you were asking in LinkedIn what are the important characteristics of a good risk analyst, and I think this critical thinking is very important. Once you realize that these best practices, they have good intentions behind them and there are good people behind it, but they don't know it all, and they have certain perceptions of things and whatever, and it's not an ever-ending truth. Things change. For example, good example I always give is project management, waterfall. We've been doing it for so many years. And then people started doing Agile, something completely different. But before Agile started, no one really was questioning waterfall. It's like, this is what we need to do. In our industry, I think a year ago, someone came and the NIST Institute, they came out and said, the rules they have for password complexity, it's all nonsense, and we're sorry, we've been preaching you for the last 20 years, something that doesn't really work. And the author of that document actually came out and said, it's wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. But once something gets accepted in our industry as a best practice, people just, I don't know, fall back and keep going with it. And that's what I generally now is keep questioning things and ask questions, trying to understand. And once you get started, you get deeper and deeper. And you know the whole risk management story, heat maps and behavioral economics and all that stuff. I ended up reading lots about human error because we always say things like the human being is the biggest weakness and stuff like that. And then you start reading and you realize people have actually already figured out lots of things. We just don't apply them in our industry.
Here's another embarrassing thing. The research into cognitive biases, risk perception. I mean, the field of study is called risk perception. There's the word risk in the name. I mean, there's a Wikipedia page on risk perception describing all the research into neuroeconomics and cognitive biases. Kahneman and Smith got a Nobel Prize in 2002. And right now, in 2018, some shameless consultants saying, we've just discovered cognitive biases, and it has a huge impact on risk management, apparently. So anyway, it's very embarrassing. But I wanted to ask you a question, which is something you said, which I think very interesting. You've been in information security for 10 years or so. Now that we've started calling cyber risk management or cyber risk or whatever, I lost track of all the sexy names that vendors and consultants came up with. The last ridiculous thing I saw, digital risk management. I mean,
Yeah.
it just gets stupider and stupider. You've been doing fundamentally the same thing for the 10 years. Has anything like, are we now doing something different? Is information security now should be called cyber risk management? Is it completely different, or is it just a package? Just like ERM is a package for basic like 50-year-old decision making theories.
I believe cybersecurity risk management is just risk management. It's just the threats are different, the assets are different, the impact may be a little different from any other industry or domain you're working in, but it's essentially the same. That's why I always get surprised when someone comes up with this revelation that digital risk management is actually just business risk management. Yeah, everything is just about the business. It just fits in a certain domain with different types of assets and threats, so it's essentially all the same. It doesn't make too much of a difference.
Well, tell me, what are some of the things that you've discovered in your research? Like, what are some of the things that you think are relevant and important?
Yeah, and one thing I found once I started going down this road of qualitative risk management, that what seems obvious to us isn't really obvious to people. When I talk to people, I had initially high expectations that when I talk to them and whatever, and then things will change and people will start doing it. But we work in the context of organizations, and there it's very difficult to get anything moving. The status quo is just very heavy. And I have suffered personally. I'm not able to practice quantitative risk management as I would like to. It's just not picking up. Let's say the organizations have different priorities. But what I see now, there is a big movement in information security towards quantitative risk management, especially in the US. It's picking up, and I'm here leading the FAIR Institute's UAE chapter. The FAIR Institute pushes for quantitative risk management using their model, and so far they have been really very successful making their voice heard, and it seems to picking up. So I hope this will be progressing and becoming better.
With all the information now, and I mean, with cyber risk management or cyber security, I mean, we have to, I guess, pick one name for it. Cyber risk is the same as risk management, and that's the unfortunate thing. If you Google risk management and you are new to the profession, I mean, I think you can kind of be excused, because the first 3 pages of Google will be with bullshit, complete bullshit answers. You will be taken to like PwC selling page or some sort of risk management association thought paper that basically promotes all this traditional, completely irrelevant and non-scientific scientific stuff. Same, I'm sure, same with cyber risk. So tell us one source of information. I think you've mentioned FAIR Institute. What do they have that people can start looking at to at least consider an alternative take on something that they would hear at the conferences? Because people, like, I've seen this is just what bugs me so much. It's such a sexy topic. Any risk management conference on the planet, you open it, there is an agenda item to cyber risk, and it's almost like spearheading the discussion, as if we've sorted out all the decision-making problems, as if we don't have any problems with the culture of the organization. Now suddenly cyber is the biggest thing, which of course is nonsense. But they all say the same things and usually promote some sort of technological solution for the cyber risk problem, which is supposedly something that you can take and measure by itself. What's your preferred source of information? What's the good resource?
Sorry, my screensaver. Yeah, I think the Fair Institute does a lot of great work in this arena. And that's how when I first started it and had issues with risk management, there was no guidance on how to think about a scenario. And I would be just sitting there and making stuff up. Oh, this could be risky because I don't know what. And I'm originally an engineer. I like things to be very clear. So I got to know about the Fair Institute, and they have basically a model. And it makes a huge difference if you use a model and try to model your risk and try to understand it, compared to sitting in a analysis workshop or something and people just talk at each other and try to make it up. So they have a very clear model with a very clear taxonomy.
Yeah.
So things, risk, for example, is probable frequency and probable magnitude of future loss. So something very clear that we in cyber can work with. I think it differentiates itself from other definitions read in ISO and whatever. They're sometimes very vague and people turn into interpretations. So they have very clear taxonomy. And the model is an ontology. So I can very clearly see the relationship between control strength, vulnerability, and how that fits into the risk model. So sometimes when you use this, you actually discover something new. You always have a gut feeling. You think this is high risk or whatever. When you do a heat map, we're usually just documenting our gut feeling. I think this should be high, and that works kind of in reverse. But when you use the model like FAIR, you actually get surprised at the end. Oh, it turns out to be totally different than what I thought. And that makes a huge difference. That's why I'm trying to, here in our region, I'm advocating for it, presenting every now and then and talk to people about it. And it's starting to pick up. A few people I met so far actually have heard of it and have experimented with it. I think this is great work for cybersecurity. It's a start. I hope it doesn't get hijacked at some point of time by consultants and people pushing products and stuff like that.
Oh, don't worry, it will. Now, here's a provocational question. And this is kind of, I've been talking a lot about this in the context of corporate risk management, and I call it risk management 1 and risk management 2. And risk management 1 is essentially when we take the risk and we try to analyze that risk for the sake of understanding the nature of the risk and how to mitigate the risk. So the risk is the centerpiece of our analysis. And that's one approach. But another approach in risk management 2, and this is where all the kind of decision analysis methodologies come in and the decision quality frameworks, the other approach is that you don't actually analyze the risk as its own entity for the sake of understanding that risk. Instead, whenever making any significant business decision, you consider all those different risks. So for example, when approving a budget, and when making a strategic decision, strategic choice that we're going to outsource certain things, or we're going to use cloud storage, or we're going to upgrade our infrastructure, or we're not going to upgrade our infrastructure, whenever making a business decision, which most of the time has nothing to do with cyber kind of immediately, it has a flow-on effect, but not an immediate direct relationship. It's like we're not making a decision about cyber risk. We're making a business decision about a budget or a production schedule or something, or an investment project. And whenever we make that decision, cyber risk is just one of many considerations for the decision makers. Just like financial risk, just like reputational, just like health and safety, environmental, and all the other risks. And this is where I'm feeling deja vu, because yet again we have this risk, yes, which is important, but it will only be a matter of time before people will find something more important than cyber risk. There will be a next big thing. Pandemics was big, Y2K was big. Like every year, you think cyber is everything right now, but every year something bigger comes up because consultants are very busy selling work. They have to come up with stuff. I don't know, maybe next one will be artificial intelligence, and somehow it will be outside of the cyber scope because they've finished selling cyber insurance and they will need to sell artificial intelligence insurance. I don't know how their brain works, but they is that like is are we again stepping on the same problem that we always like? Are we making exactly the same mistake as we always do? We take a topic, and instead of changing how we make decisions and how we operate with this new topic in mind, I mean, cyber is a huge implication, obviously, because information is now digital. Previously, a bad person had to gain physical access to your assets to stop an operations. Right now, a hacker on a motorbike from a parking lot can impact your energy plant and stop it, or somebody can, just like they did in Saudi, somebody can throw USB sticks on the parking lot, and give it some sexy name and just wait for people to plug it in and give them access to the whole infrastructure mainframe. Um, it, it's huge, and the implications are huge because by impacting one computer in the head office, you can potentially block all shipments around the world for a logistical company. Obviously the exposure is huge, the implications are huge. It's a very real risk. But are we again making the same mistake? And I don't know the answer, but I have this feeling: are we again making the same mistake? We're treating this risk as something that deserves all our attention, yet we still haven't adjusted how we behave and how we make decisions. We still approve budgets without giving proper consideration to cyber risk, because another team, separate team, will think about cyber risk in their quarterly risk workshops. Like, is it weird?
Yeah, I can only talk about what I see here in our region happening. And their cybersecurity risk management is still not integrated tightly into the corporate processes. It's seen as something that someone does, and then the results feed somewhere in. But people don't really realize that essentially risk management is a decision-making tool. It fits into any decision. Whenever you have to make a decision, it's still treated as a separate thing that these IT people do, and yeah, it's confusing. Sometimes I have issues with risk appetite, which essentially in cybersecurity in our domain is just basically the budget you have been given. It's already expressed. I gave you this much money this year. Yeah, I don't want to use it, and that's it. But we don't look at the risk scenarios as a business case, like any other business case that gets submitted, where people discuss and analyze. And even if it costs a lot of money, management makes a decision and gets involved with it. Yeah. But as long as it stays as heat maps in colors, and green we can accept, orange, let's do something about it, and red, let's do something a little faster. It's not really a decision-making tool. But that's and like we said before, we really don't learn from other industries. When I looked into what safety is doing, they're thinking about complex systems, and human fallibility and all of that is much more advanced than anyone in cybersecurity. So we're not learning from things that others have made. So I don't know what the future will bring.
Don't worry about that. Nobody's learning from anything. I mean, that's part of fun being human. We don't, there's a saying, smart person learns from others' mistakes, and silly person doesn't learn, or like something like that. I think the reality, nobody learns from anything. And there is some research in cognitive biases to suggest that unless we've experienced something which is a life or death matter, like unless our experience has been shocking enough to fundamentally change our approach, we most of the time do not learn from our mistakes. Like, the mistake has to be so grave that we almost died, or somebody almost died, then we'll probably learn from that mistake. Otherwise, we're not that good. But anyway, that's an aside. So sorry, I wanted to come back to something, and I'm kind of stepping on your turf at the moment a bit. Is it part of the challenge that the mandate for managing the cyber-related risks has been given to IT? And even though, if we kind of technically say managing cybersecurity risk is in fact changing the way decisions are done, changing the way people think about cybersecurity, changing their behavior, and as well as protecting the infrastructure, as well as removing any vulnerability from the software, it is part of the challenge that a significant portion, I don't know what percentage, but a significant portion of the management of cybersecurity is outside of IT domain and outside of the not responsibility, but influence that IT professionals can do in their departments. I mean, how easy is it for the IT person to approach a legal department and say, well, you actually have to change our draft contracts, and you actually have to change the way contracts are reviewed and approved to reduce the cybersecurity risk, because that will do so much more to the reduction of the cybersecurity risk than any kind of software patch than IT can implement later. Is that a challenge? I mean, is that real?
Not sure if I understood the question correctly, but first of all, the different, depending on which industry in the role of risk management or cybersecurity risk management is different. In some industries, you're probably much more integrated with the business, maybe like in banks. In other domains, maybe not so tightly integrated.
Every industry I worked in, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
No.
Okay, you have seen more than I have.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen insurance and banking.
I wanted to make.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen insurance and banking, but literally every other one I've worked in most industries outside of financial sector, it just wasn't.
Yeah, I think most of the time the information security business analysts or risk managers have only themselves to blame because we don't invest enough time in understanding the problem, and we jump into buying something. Let's get the latest box, latest software, and we overpromise. Part of it is also because the products have names like data loss prevention, as if we could prevent data loss. And we jump into implementing solutions, while sometimes you would actually need to change the process. And that changes the discussion you will have with business, and it's much more difficult.
It is. It genuinely is.
Things like phishing or CEO fraud and things like that. Why is it so easy that someone sends an email and someone else just wires millions? Something's wrong with your process.
Yeah.
But what will you find is that people say, okay, we need to have the latest phishing appliance or phishing cloud service or whatever. But no one actually talks about what about changing the process.
Yeah.
Because that's a difficult discussion with business. And we believe just buying the box, we have solved the issue. Of course, we haven't. It might work for a few months and then something will still happen. And then maybe you will have another discussion, say, okay, we need to raise the maturity. Now, instead of just this box, maybe we propose even a different box, another box instead. Or maybe we will start have the discussion, okay, you know what, we overpromised and this box really can't do all of that. We can capture 90% of the stuff, but there's some stuff we really need to sit down and change the process. So sometimes we actually have ourselves to blame, and sometimes we make decisions on behalf of management. We say, oh, they will never approve it, so we don't even propose the treatment plan, which isn't really our job. Give them multiple treatment plans and options, give them your recommendation, what you think, and then let them make the decision. But most of the time, really, you have only two options. You tell them, we could do nothing, or we can buy this. and that's not really much of an option. Obviously, they will just choose whatever the second one is and hope things will get better.
Yeah.
So I think it's we're harming ourselves. You can't keep blaming. You can blame the business only for so long.
And I think it's the challenge is identical in risk management, because risk management too is all about changing the way decisions are done to make sure risk analysis is performed at the time of preparing a decision, and quantitative risk analysis is performed at the time of preparing and making a decision, not once a quarter, because that just makes no sense whatsoever.
It's too late.
And obviously it's so much harder. Obviously it's very difficult to approach a CFO and say, you've been budgeting for 20 years, let's budget differently. Because the 3 scenarios that you were doing in your budget are too optimistic, and they do not account for any of the significant risks that they should account for. And in fact, you've been deceiving management all this time, and no wonder the budgets are not met by the end of the year. No wonder you have to do corrections every quarter, because your budget is so fundamentally unrealistic that there's no chance it will actually hit the target. And you also create unrealistic targets. It adds a lot of stress. People start to be fraudulent because they want the bonus payments, but they know the budget is unrealistic, so they start making up shit, and it just flows on to this huge. But this is a very difficult conversation. I mean, I'm a relatively outgoing person. Like I can talk non-stop, as you can probably tell. But it took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to convince the CFO to give me full access to the budgeting process and be able to replace his 3 scenarios, which did not reflect the truth in any way, with our 10,000 Monte Carlo simulation. 2 years. Can you imagine for some? And that was in Russia, completely different environment. There, people are pretty straight talkers. Like they do not have any political correctness when it comes to business. In some instances, at the very high level, of course, it's all politics. But I cannot imagine doing that in the Middle East. Like speaking to, especially if the CFO is local, speaking to them saying, let's do something different. I mean, this is so unlikely.
I wouldn't generalize. I think change in general is very difficult.
No,
no matter where you are.
Of course.
But maybe the dynamics are sometimes different. You have lots of private companies here, family owned and things like that. Maybe things there move differently than when you are a public company.
Yes.
You have multiple shareholders and things like that. So there's a big difference there. But I think in general things are moving into the right direction, just very slowly. And things like Monte Carlo simulations and stuff like that, many people don't realize they're actually already using it in the business. They're just not using it in risk management.
Yep.
In my industry, for example, lots of them are actually using it when they do simulations and stuff like that. They just don't know. They open their software and they put in their ranges and stuff like that, and then it simulates and comes a result.
Yep.
They just don't know that in the background what exactly is happening. You know, we're just saying, okay, that stuff that you're doing in engineering or maintenance or whatever, we want to do something similar in risk. It's just sometimes the revelation of we're actually already doing it, just not in this domain. I assume in banks maybe it's similar. Maybe they're doing it for justifying some, I don't know.
In real sector,
like
in real sector companies,
in risk management are not using it.
In real sector companies, simulations and proper risk modeling is a given. All engineers use it for when they make designs. Engineers use it when they make decisions, especially in oil and gas. Marketing people use it when they make pricing decisions, which is, again, it just adds another layer of embarrassment. How can other business units in the company use better risk management tools than the risk managers themselves? I mean, why do you even need risk managers then? If they, and this was I think the best presentation I've seen. It was, I can't remember what the oil company it was. It was a huge, I think it was European, huge European oil company presenting at the conference, and the head of risk is basically saying, I've implemented heat maps for every business unit, and that was amazing. And so I asked him a question. Are you at all embarrassed that your engineers using proper Monte Carlo to model wells and where they're going to, all their exploration decisions are based on proper risk modeling, and you come to them, to people who are sophisticated in understanding uncertainty and understanding and modeling uncertainty? Are you at least at all embarrassed to come into them with the heat map, which has no mathematical sense whatsoever? And I mean, it was fun. You should have seen his face.
Yeah, yeah. No, I see lots of people now, especially about heat maps, when you talk to them, they realize it's really nonsensical. They're just struggling on how to get this message through to management. And especially for us in cybersecurity, most of the time we report to the ERM people. So there's another layer of people you have to convince that what they have been doing for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, you would like to change.
Yeah.
And in some organizations, cybersecurity becomes just another dot on someone else's heat map, depending on what domain or industry you're in. And in others, maybe, yes, you get your own heat map, maybe. I don't know. And
is this...
in others, you get your complete heat map as just one dot on some other heat map.
So this is how you can tell a successful information security professional from a not successful information security professional. If you have your own heat map, that means you've made it.
Yeah, maybe. But really, it doesn't help to be tough on people. Because I've been there. I've been doing the same mistakes. It's just once you get started and you go down that road, you start realizing that there is a better way to do things. It just takes time. I had, like I said, I had higher expectations in the beginning when I started advocating for it, that it will go faster. Now I'm just happy if people acknowledge, oh, there is something else, and I will go back and read about it more, and they just get interested about the subject.
When I first kind of got interested in the topic, I immediately called the only person who I know is like the best information security professional in Russia. He's the president of the Information Security, Anti-Corruption and Fraud Prevention Society, the Russian chapter, and he's very honest in saying certain things are complete lies and certain things are just marketing, and certain things are actually real. And I think he's kind of his message was that so sorry, I forgot what his message was because something you said triggered it in my mind, but anyway, it will come to me. Let me switch to something else while my brain remembers what that point was, because it was something very important. So what was the last thing that you've said, because it immediately triggered that thought in my mind.
I forgot.
It's all right. Let me summarize the kind of the first.
I was talking about how difficult it is to, and not to judge people, because it's not that easy to realize that you're doing something wrong, and setting your expectation that okay, if people just know about what I'm talking, that will get the process started. They will start questioning us.
Yes, sorry, yes, exactly. Thank you very much for that reminder. The thing he said to me is that part of the picture, and I mean, this is where I think not enough credit is given to the consultants, insurance companies, and software vendors. They are amazing predators. Like they understand the human nature so well, and they target their products so specifically to the human weakness, and that's why they are successful. So I mean, even though I personally think it's highly unethical, it makes a lot of business sense, and that's why we have what we have. Because dealing with cybersecurity, I mean, cyber risks is a new reality. Now that most of the assets are digital, that means protecting your business requires digital protection or some sort of information protection. If your new asset is your data, then protecting that data is the new norm in the business. But the reality is, the business itself is not really willing to change the way they do things. They're not willing to change the way they operate, not really willing to change the way they make decisions. So they are actually quite happy to delegate this whole headache to the IT department, which will later will become scapegoats basically if something happens. It just it makes so much sense from a human point of view, from a human psychology point of view. Is why change everything you do on a day-to-day basis when you can just give some budget to a person somewhere on the third floor, let them make their own decisions, and then hope that the problem goes away, which of course it never does. Luckily, I think we're seeing that the public is not buying that excuse. And when something happens, like when a data breach happens, when customer data gets lost or stolen, or when an extortion attempt or ransom attempt is done, or when operations break, they still blame the CFOs, CEOs, and the executives have to resign sometimes. I mean,
sometimes.
Disappointingly, not often enough, obviously. So luckily, the public is not buying that it's just an IT issue. It's clearly is a business thing. But this is, I mean, again, this makes so much sense from a human point of view, that IT cyber risks are delegated to an IT team. They have to deal with it. An IT team has limited budget, limited ability to influence the decision makers back. And plus, decision makers, by delegating cyber risk to the IT department, they've already given an indication that they're not willing to change. So when an IT person goes back and says, but I want you to change the way you make investment decisions, because every investment decision, every acquisition you make exposes us to new systems, new risks, new vulnerabilities. And if you just change the way you do business, that will make it so much easier for us to protect your information. And they go, no, we're not going to change.
Yeah.
We're not going to change what we do.
That's kind of why secretively you find information security people are happy when a new breach is announced, because then they know they're getting a little more attention and they're going to get the new budget and stuff like that. But again, it becomes just a point of time issue, and we really don't capitalize on it to change anything materially, actual process or whatever. We just at that time say, oh, see what happened to those people, I need this budget, and then we run with this budget, and you're back not really having changed anything. But yeah, we get secretively happy when a breach happens to someone else. Or it happens to us and you say, I told you so. I asked for this budget and you never gave it to me. But when you talked about data and the risks to it, now we also, data impacts physical risks. Well, that wasn't as prevalent in the past. It was just data. Now we have IoT and things like that, and all the sensors and all the stuff that's being controlled. So now safety is going to be a big issue. And currently, if you look at what's happening now, it's kind of repeating all the mistakes that we have done before with IT. They're being repeated with IoT, and I do not believe that it's going to get any better, because all these sensors and all these controls, they're getting cheaper and cheaper, and no one designs them with security in mind. So this could be potentially disastrous. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
If governments don't get in and regulate this somehow, the industry itself will not. There's no incentives to make stuff more secure.
Well, and that's very interesting. The cyber risk is at the design stage and at the initial decision-making stage, and that's where it has to be dealt with or managed more so at the kind of the patching and protecting the potential, limiting the potential exposure, probably as well. But anyway, the other thing that the president of the Russian Society that I talked to said is that every single breach, who's holding the antivirus, hardware, software companies responsible? Are they paying any compensations for the breaches that happened on their software, on their hardware? Is there any legal responsibility for them Did anyone ever go to jail from the actual vendors that sell us all this amazing thing? Then when breaches do happen, and obviously they do happen still, is anyone ever responsible? Because what you said is just, I felt it was so important. Nobody's thinking about information security at the design stage back then. I mean, back then it's kind of maybe justifiable, which probably shouldn't have been justifiable.
Yeah.
But right now, probably still isn't really thinking about it that hard.
Yeah. At this point of liability and warranties, I think 20 years ago maybe, I remember reading it from Bruce Schneier, a famous security specialist, and he talked about it, and nothing has changed. People are not, software companies are not liable. Basically, I think if you even read whatever they make you accept at the end, it basically says, we don't even guarantee it will do anything.
Yeah.
Just take it as is, and good luck to you. But it isn't a simple issue. It's a whole economical system. We want software, we want it cheap, and the same is happening now in the physical world with all these sensors and cameras and whatever. We want them as cheap as possible. And if you're not willing to pay more for some liability, warranty, or guarantees, it's not going to get better. And currently the incentives are, because the system allows it, sell it as cheap as you can, and make your money and move on. So that's not going to change anytime soon. And it's going to get worse with now the integration in the physical world, with smart homes, and that's just in your home, but everything else. And now we have cars, which is basically just a computer on wheels driving around.
It's insane.
It's going to be a very dangerous world we're going to live on if we don't start managing it correctly.
Yeah.
I don't know
what the future will bring. Is something that we can kind of feel personally. It's the scariest thing possible, because whoever is designing it, first they're trying to make it as cheap as possible because they need to penetrate the market. So obviously they are shortcutting a lot of things because they want to quickly penetrate as many users as possible. And until we've had hundreds of thousands data points of breakings and incidents, and then the industry learned how to deal with the information security, all the new users are so exposed. I mean, new BMW, new Mercedes-Benz that have very sophisticated computers. I think they were hacked in like 15 seconds or something. And somebody was able to block your brakes and influence your wheel movement. I mean, this is insane. Like, somebody can kill you if they just wanted to within seconds. This is, I mean, this is just crazy.
We have to also be, I don't know about this Mercedes one, but sometimes things are demonstrated, but they really work only in a lab environment and under very special conditions. We have to differentiate them from risks that are very easy to implement and could have big impact. But sometimes the news or whatever exaggerates because it sounds sensational. You mentioned also before when we talked about the impact on, sorry, my screensaver. I can't see you. The impact on people. The impact on people now with data doesn't seem even to have huge consequences. Most of the companies that had breaches or whatever, they did just fine a few days later. No significant changes. But this might be totally different when people's lives are that matter. Maybe then people will have a totally different reaction than if it's just data. We'll have to see. I don't know.
It's kind of a bad feeling. Like, you hope that the industry will stop buying, marketing, and actually start doing what they're supposed to do by changing the way they operate and make decisions. As soon as somebody dies, I mean, it's not a good future. I agree.
Well, businesses might have some power in some industries, you can decide what you buy and what you don't buy, and you can maybe set your own standards and things like that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the public and people, you just buy what's available, what's cheap, you buy it online, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah. If I were to summarize our kind of quick discussion, would you say it makes sense to try and work with the cyber-related risks or information security risks by changing the way people make decisions, by changing the people behavior and culture to think about those things when they do certain actions, to change the way processes operate, change the way business operates, to reduce the potential for risk, as well as all the technological solutions. And I mean, who knows, maybe the technological solutions will be much less required if people change their behavior. That's the hypothetical future, but the reality is humans are very difficult, and it's even more difficult, just as it is difficult for the risk professionals to influence other business units to change the way they make decisions to think about risks. It's probably even more difficult for the IT professionals to change the way business operates, given the new cyber threat. So on one side, most of the hype is pure marketing, and a lot of probably unethical products and services are being sold because they don't actually solve anything. They just cost a lot of money. But at the same time, this hype hopefully gives the IT professionals at least some um, argument for why they need to change processes, why they need to change decisions, and is it then kind of back on the IT person to use that opportunity, to not waste that opportunity by buying another software update, and instead trying to change some of the decision making in the company?
Yeah, I think IT first needs to change their own perception of what risk management is and just accept it as a decision-making tool that can go beyond buying products. Once we realize this, and when we realize that our job is basically to help management make decisions, show them the different options they have, and our job is not to convince them no matter what to buy this or that box, because it's not for the sake of that box or the software. So IT has to do, or cybersecurity or whatever, they have to do their own thinking first, and then maybe there is hope that they can work more efficiently with the business.
And another point,
clean our house first.
Yeah, and well, it's always the case. And another point, a very important point that I think you mentioned is, once you integrate into decision, like once you mentally, as an IT professional, once you're mentally ready, or as a risk professional, we have exactly the same challenges. As an IT professional, once you're mentally ready, that risk management is not a quarterly update of your heat map, but instead a decision-making tool. And once you've kind of made some progress to convince the rest of the business that they should be thinking about cyber-related risks at the time of making any significant decision, and not once a quarter. The third point, which I think you've mentioned, and it's equally as important in risk management, when you integrate into decision-making, you have to bring some substance. The management is not going to buy subjective feelings and opinions. So all the qualitative risk analysis is probably not going to get you over the line, because you can convince the CFO to give you a chance to get involved into the planning and the budgeting cycle, or you can convince the maintenance manager to get you involved into the maintenance planning and forecasting process. But unless you've got something of value to bring, and red, amber, green is not value enough to impact on those processes, you have to bring proper math. And luckily, there are models available that allow you to calculate and to measure the risks from a cybersecurity point of view, the risks associated with a particular decision. Because you have to show scenarios. You have to show different scenarios, multiple, whether it's 5 scenarios or 10,000 scenarios. They have to be realistic. They have to be understandable by business. And I think we've now done a wonderful job for Doug Hubert promoting his books in this little video. His third book, we've talked about his first two books, so we might as well talk about his third book, is How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. And I think he's actually making a point, is that you can measure, you can do scenarios, you can, because it's uncertain, because we're doing something that hasn't happened before. Most of the time, some of the threats are completely unique. We haven't had Internet of Things before, so there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of modeling that has to happen to just highlight what are the different scenarios, what are the different possibilities. It's not a single point future. The risk does not have two dimensions, likelihood and consequence. You cannot take this highly uncertain future and just dumb it down to a single point on the map. I mean, that is just mathematical nonsense. That's why we have ranges. That's why we have distributions. That's why we have tornado diagrams and the results of the simulations. So it's weird, but very important that once you realize it maybe is about decision making, once you convince the rest of the organization that it's about decision making, then the IT specialists probably need to use adult tools to bring something to the table, something that the business doesn't have themselves.
Yeah, I think we need to become more comfortable with our own uncertainty. I think people are not comfortable with it, and they're afraid to have a discussion with management and tell them, I'm really not that sure what exactly is going to happen next year, and we make these assumptions maybe that management are expecting that we can stand up and say very clearly, this is going to happen, this is exactly what's going to be impacted. But I don't think management actually have these expectations because they're used to uncertainty. They make lots of decisions under uncertainty. And sometimes we're a little arrogant. We think management will not understand us. They don't understand IT. They don't understand technology, and it's really not about IT.
Yeah.
It's just we're talking the wrong language. Yeah. Why are you talking about technology? It's business. You have to talk to them in business terms, and that language is dollars or whatever currency you're dealing with. If you can measure it and express it, the loss exposure in terms of the currency you're using, that's far better or more likely to get you results than you're talking about some technical stuff and vulnerabilities and patching and bugs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this is such a weird misconception, and it's just a lie, IT and risk professionals tell themselves, and in all the risk conferences, obviously. It's such a nonsense. I mean, I do a lot of training courses for executives, and usually risk managers are present. And without a fail, the only person who doesn't get integration into decision making and applying proper modeling, the only person in the room is always the risk manager. Like it's actually embarrassing. We have CFO, head of marketing, head of production, CEO, some of the board directors sitting in the room. And I always premise by saying, like, this is going to be controversial. It's not about ERM that you like so much. This is about decision making. Here's the science behind it. And every single time, all the questions, like all the dumbest questions, but we still need risk appetite statement. But what do we do on a quarterly basis? Like, how do we update the heat map? Like, all the dumbest questions always come from the risk manager. Like, they literally are the only person in the room that doesn't get it. And the CFO, the CFO at the end usually says, this wasn't controversial at all. It's so simple and makes total sense. Because when we apply proper risk analysis tools, what we come back to the CFO saying, this budget has a 10% chance of being achieved. And there's a 90% chance that we will have a cash deficit, and the cash deficit will likely be in this range. Like, he gets it because he understands how his budget works. He understands what's the likelihood of meeting or not meeting the budget. He can compare our analysis with his own perception on whether he feels confident or not confident about that budget. And we can say, you feel confident about this budget, but our analysis shows that you should feel less confident because the uncertainty is too great. So in fact, this budget is highly unlikely to happen as you plan. It's not a difficult conversation.
I agree.
And
business, they make lots of decisions. They have lots of business cases, and it's always about some sort of investment that needs to be made. And cybersecurity risk is just another investment they have to deal with. And if you don't express it in terms that they can compare to all their other investments, because you're competing with these, you're going to lose. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
If they don't see, they talk about billions of dollars investment projects and things like that, and you're talking about buying a box or a cloud service or whatever. There's no comparison. You will be get less priority than all the other really business-oriented business cases.
Well,
it's difficult.
There's that, but also, again, I want to challenge you on that. There's one conversation about treating cyber risk investment as a business investment and justifying it in business terms. I mean, sure, that's important. But is it also important when you're making any business investment to think of cyber as one of many considerations? Because that is the problem. Do you see the difference? Talking about having cyber as an agenda item and saying we need 10 million to invest in cybersecurity, that's one point, one way of doing things. But another way of doing things is we want to make a $2 billion investment, but in fact, if you want to make sure that this investment does not expose you to additional cyber risk, this investment has to be 2,500,000,000 to make sure we take care of the cyber-related risks as part of that investment. Those are very different conversations. One is presented by the IT. You have your own meeting, you have your own agenda item, you have your own presentation, and that's maybe important to close some gaps. But the reality is business makes those business decisions, investment decisions, every single week. And while you're patching something on one side, they've just bought a new company. They've just acquired a competitor. And the competitor is just exposed you to 5 or 100 times more cyber-related risks. But nobody's given any thought to cyber-related risks at the time of making the purchase decision. So is cyber risk management, if it does even exist, is it both? And the kind of the patching, the separate agenda item on cybersecurity is the lesser effort, and the thinking of cyber when making normal business decisions should be the primary focus of IT specialists?
I think it's both. In the one scenario, it should be tightly integrated with business decisions.
Yes.
And you already probably, based on the domain you're doing it, for example, in safety. I'm sure most business projects in our domain always have safety as risk being considered very consciously.
Yeah.
So that definitely that needs to happen, and that's probably not happening enough.
It doesn't seem.
Then there is the other domain where it happens on its own as part of some technology investments or projects or whatever. For example, in the design phase and things like that, we consider cybersecurity implications. But maybe sometimes at these early stages of projects, maybe it's too early to see what exactly the end result will be or what is exactly planned. So it has to be integrated in multiple stages and being monitored that the project itself hasn't changed. What sometimes happens is that you agree on something at the beginning and the project reaches its end and you find architecture and everything has changed, but no one went back to what the requirements have changed, and no one invited security back in and asking them, okay, how will this impact? So it's both. It needs to be tighter integrated in business and become one of the risk domains they look into, and it can be on its own. Ideally, of course, would be if it's most often figured by business. at the moment, it's this periodic, okay, we do risk assessments every quarter, or and let's look around and see what might have changed, and
it's always playing catch up.
That doesn't work. Yes, but you see this mentality, we have it in other things in the business. Performance reviews.
Yes.
Yeah, we do them once or twice per year, and what's the point? And if I tell someone at the end of the year you haven't been doing that good, if you don't do it continuously and get instant feedback, it doesn't. But we have these, I don't know, routines or practices in other areas in business. It's difficult to break them out, and it will take time. The people that where this is tightly ingrained, generation is retiring and new generations are coming. They're more open to this whole agile thinking and thinking quickly on their feet and changing. They're open to change. So it's going to come. It's just going to take a few generations.
Fingers crossed, because we have students graduating from many universities in risk space, and all they know is how to do a heat map. And if they're lucky, a bow tie diagram.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. But let's see. Anyway, I don't know.
But for full disclosure, as I've been told numerous times, there are universities that do good programs that cover.
Yes, for example, the FAIR Institute is their method is being taught in San Jose University, I think, in the States. It's part of the curriculum, teaching that there. So there is some change happening here.
There is hope.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Osama, for taking the time and talking to me about this. I found this fascinating. I found this very useful. I'm going to do the research that you've mentioned now. Hopefully, the people that will one day see this this video also found it useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.